Have you ever flipped through an old comic book, maybe from the 30s or 40s, and thought, wow, the art looks simple, like really simple, almost like a kid's drawing compared to the hyper-detailed cinematic art we see in comics today? Well, you're not wrong. Early superhero art was definitely a lot simpler, but there's a fascinating story behind why that is. It wasn't just because the artists weren't as skilled, far from it. It was a combination of technology, time, and the very purpose of comics back then. So, let's dive into the Golden Age and uncover why Superman and Batman's first appearances looked so different from their modern counterparts. First, we need to talk about the printing press. In the 1930s and 40s, comics were printed on cheap, absorbent newsprint paper. The printing technology was basic, using a method called four-color process. This involved layering dots of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink to create all the colors. If you look closely at an old comic, you can actually see these dots. It's called the Ben-Day dot system. This process had huge limitations. It couldn't handle subtle gradients or complex textures. Fine lines would bleed together and turn into a muddy mess. So, artists had to adapt. They used bold, thick black lines to define everything clearly. Think about Superman's original design by Joe Shuster: strong jaw, simple costume, and very clear, heavy outlines. This wasn't an artistic choice for minimalism. It was a practical necessity to make sure the character was recognizable after the crude printing process was done with it. Coloring was another huge factor. The color palettes were extremely limited, usually to just 64 colors, and often even fewer were used to save money. Colorists, who were often uncredited and underpaid, would fill in the black and white line art with flat, solid colors. There was no room for fancy shading or lighting effects. A character's shirt was one solid color. A wall was another. This is why Golden Age comics have that distinct, vibrant, but very flat look. They had to make things pop off the page with the limited tools they had. So, a blue costume wasn't just blue. It was a bright, bold, in-your-face blue. This simplicity in color helped define the characters and make them instantly iconic. You could recognize Superman just by that flash of red and blue. Then there's the sheer speed at which these comics were produced. Today, a single comic book issue can take a team of artists months to create. But back in the Golden Age, it was a factory. Artists were churning out pages at an incredible rate, sometimes drawing an entire issue in just a few weeks. They were paid by the page, so speed was everything. There was simply no time for intricate details or painstaking. The focus was on storytelling, getting the action and the plot across as clearly and quickly as possible. The art style that developed was one of efficiency. Panels were often straightforward grids. Characters were drawn with dynamic but simple poses, and backgrounds were often minimal or even non-existent. The goal was to keep the reader's eye moving and turn the page. This high-pressure environment naturally favored a simpler, more direct artistic style. Let's also consider the intended audience and the medium itself. Comics were seen as disposable entertainment for children. They cost a dime, and nobody expected them to be preserved as high art. The storytelling was direct and action-packed. The art needed to match that. It had to be easy for a kid to understand at a glance. Complex compositions or ambiguous expressions would just slow things down. The artists of the Golden Age, like Jack Kirby and Will Eisner, were masters of this. They knew how to use simple lines and bold shapes to convey incredible power, speed, and emotion. Look at Captain America punching a villain. The pose is exaggerated, the lines of impact are clear, and the whole panel screams energy. It's simple, yes, but it's also incredibly effective. They weren't trying to create a realistic portrait. They were trying to tell a superpowered story in the most exciting way possible. So, when we say early superhero art was simpler, we're not saying it was worse. It was a style born out of limitations that became a powerful language in its own right. The artists of the Golden Age were pioneers. They were writing the rulebook for visual storytelling in a brand new medium. They created the visual DNA for characters that have lasted for almost a century. Without the bold lines of Joe Shuster's Superman or the dynamic energy of Jack Kirby's Captain America, we wouldn't have the visually spectacular comics we enjoy today. Their simplicity was their strength. It made these characters iconic, timeless, and instantly accessible to millions. Over the decades, of course, things changed. Printing technology got dramatically better. Better paper, more sophisticated color separation, and eventually digital coloring and printing opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Artists were no longer constrained by the old limitations. They could use fine lines, subtle shading, and painterly colors. The rise of the Silver Age in the 60s, with artists like Steve Ditko and John Romita Sr., started to show more detail and realism. Characters became more anatomically correct, and their worlds felt more textured. Then came the Bronze Age and the Modern Age, where artists like Neil Adams, Frank Miller, and Jim Lee pushed the boundaries even further, bringing a gritty, cinematic quality to the comic book page. The art became more and more complex, reflecting a shift in comics being seen not just as kids' stuff, but as a legitimate art form for a more mature audience. Today, comic art is incredibly diverse. You can find everything from hyper-realistic painted art to styles that intentionally mimic that old-school, simple Golden Age look for nostalgic effect. But it's all built on the foundation laid by those early pioneers. They took a cheap, fast, and limited medium and used it to create legends. They proved that you don't need photorealism to tell a powerful story. Sometimes, all you need is a bold idea, a strong line, and a splash of bright color. So next time you see a Golden Age comic, don't just see the simplicity. See the ingenuity, the efficiency, and the raw, unfiltered power of an art form in its infancy. It's a testament to the creativity that can blossom, not in spite of limitations, but because of them. Thanks so much for watching. If you're a fan of comic book history or art, let me know in the comments what era of comic art is your favorite. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the worlds we love. See you next time.